the thank you for coming out to the final intro to UI UX workshop. Let me screen share. Sorry. So today I'm going to be going over fundamentals of visual design and also ending things off in the product lifecycle. So I believe last time we ended where we left off at low fidelity prototypes, which just to reiterate are basically wireframes and low fidelity are just bare sketches and structure with no visual detail and so no branding, no color, no real content, which allows for rapid iteration. And this demos your features in a visual format and is like a digital blueprint of your product because it can show you aspects of usability and user pain points that you hadn't considered. But ultimately, it really is just more of a digital blueprint to figure out all of the fundamentals of your product. And it also gives you an ability, you're also able to test it with your users and gain a fresh perspective that and notice issues that you might not have noticed before when you were just iterating with your brain. Also, from a more product and more business perspective, this is really fundamental for when you're communicating with developers or PMs or even investors, because ultimately word of mouth isn't always enough to communicate your ideas. So low fidelity prototypes really give you a very cheap and easy way to communicate your ideas to these moving players within your product. So as you can see down here, these are two examples of low fidelity wireframes. So there's no color or branding, and all the text is dummy text as well. And as you can see, it really just shows you the fundamentals of the product rather than fully iterating what it entails. Okay, so what are the key elements of a wireframe? So first, what's the content? So what content exists on this page? So as you can see on this example here, there's headers, sections, buttons, and images. So you're just generally laying out where they're gonna be and what exists on the page at all. And the second, information architecture. So how is it organized? So the ordering of sections, the location of the copy, etc. So as you can see, for example, under the main header, there's two call to actions and and they're different colors. So like what's the location of this and like what content goes where. And then third, functionality. So how will the interface work? So what's going to happen if I hover over the button? Like, is anything going to happen? And, is there horizontal scrolling? Is there vertical scrolling? So just really figuring out the nitty gritty functionality of the product. And finally, user behavior. So how are the users going to interact with it? Like how intuitive is your product? And like where at what points are users entailed to do actions? So after low fidelity prototyping, we move on to low fidelity wireframing. We move on to high fidelity prototyping. So high fidelity prototyping is prototypes that more closely resemble the final product. So they capture the actual look and feel of the product in the advanced stages of the product development lifecycle. And here you can really evaluate and depict visual design and consistency of the product, which includes interactions and clickability of the product. So this is great for working off customer feedback and finding data on specific areas. So actually in this image here, on the left, you can see a low fidelity wireframe, and the one on the right is actually a mid fidelity wireframe. So this is it's still essentially bits and pieces of the product, but it is like slightly more advanced. So this is a better example of a high fidelity prototype. So as you can see, there's branding, there's color, and like the interactions are all prototyped. This can be done on software such as like Figma, Adobe XD, and Sketch, which are the three most prevalent softwares in the industry right now. But yeah, as you can see here, it really is as close as you can get to a real mock-up of what your product can look like. And so there's a lot of benefits to this as well. For example, you have a stronger ability to do usability testing, and statistics and data have shown that users are more likely to share actual opinions when they have a more tangible product in their hands. And similar to low fidelity wireframes, it really is a great way for you to communicate as a designer, for you to communicate the end product to shareholders, to stakeholders, to your to other members of like a cross-functional team. And then, okay, now that we've kind of gone through the entire product life cycle through the course of each of the workshops, I'm going to be expanding a little bit more about visual design and visual design principles, which is essentially the user interface of each of the product. Yeah. So first, why is it important? So visual design draws users to correct functionalities, prioritizes tasks, and increases brand through visual cues. This includes color, typography, and hierarchy. But at the end of the day, it really is like basic things. For example, why is a button why is a button in a rectangle? Or like, why is something bolded and something isn't? It's just these small things that draw your eye to, that draw users' eyes to certain things very intuitively. And why is this important? The user's first impression of any product is always visual design. So from a product perspective, this is really important to feel credibility of your product and competitive advantage. So for example, like if you were to like open a new software like iOS app for the first time and it's just really, really ugly, like that really goes against the credibility of the product. And ultimately users are like user experience, the entire user experience process is super important, but ultimately users are still interacting with a visual interface. So in order to have a truly great user experience, you really have to have a appealing user interface. And here is just an overview of the aesthetic usability effect, which is one of the laws of user experience. So the aesthetic usability effect shows that users often perceive aesthetically pleasing design as design that's more usable. So that, as from a more business and product perspective, that's super important for keeping your users and making sure your users come back to use your product. And so these are the 5 visual design principles. So first is scale. So the principle of scale refers to using relative size to signal importance and rank in a composition. So for example, in typeface, you can see that headers, like even here, right? Like the visual design principles, that's a header, right? That's a lot larger than the rest of the contents of the typeface. And that signals importance because of like the differences in size. And that goes into visual hierarchy. So the ordering of things is super important in how users interpret your product and the importance of different features. So for example, if something's on top of another, users are more likely to interpret that as to be more important. Or if there's a list, the ordering of the list is super important as well. So things like that, like small things like that really help guide the eye of the page for users and signify importance of certain elements. And then balance. So balance is when there's equally distributed amount of visual signal on both sides of an imaginary axis. So for example, you wouldn't want your landing page to have all the content on one side, but nothing on the other. And then contrast. So the principle of contrast refers to a juxtaposition of visually dissimilar elements in order to convey the fact that these elements are different. So a lot of times buttons are color blocked or filled, whereas the rest of the page isn't. That's to signal importance and to guide the user's eye to this specific product. And finally, gestalt principles. So gestalt principles capture a tendency to perceive the whole as opposed to individual elements. And okay, so now I'm going to be going over color and its relation to visual design and overarching visual design. So as you can see here, like there are different color connotations with different colors and their association with products. So this red and blue signify different things in users' brains. And when you're choosing colors for your product, especially with branding, it's super important to keep that in mind. And that goes into color psychology. So as you can see here, every color represents and will represents different feelings and like will make users feel different things. So as you can see here, red indicates excitement, strength, love, and energy, and blue indicates trust, peace, loyalty, and competence. Ultimately, these are all intuitive features that make users feel certain things and interpret certain things without having to actually explain it. And okay, now I'm going to be going over the basics of typography. Oh, sorry. Is there a reason why we have these color associations, or does our brain just decide blue is equal to trust? Ultimately, it goes back to color psychology. There's a lot of research that goes behind it that I can't really explain, to be honest, because I don't really know it too well. But it is just an intuitive thing. But when you're designing products, it is super important to know, like for example, if I'm designing Tinder, like I like if I'm deciding Tinder, I would want, like, there's a reason that it's red, because it's like, I believe the logo is red, but it does entail excitement, strength, love, and energy. So all these things are things, like, as a designer you should take into account. But I'm sorry, I honestly don't know the like exact psychology behind it. Okay, and finally, I'm going to be talking about typography. So for typefaces, there's a lot of different typefaces you can choose from. So the most basic, the most fundamental difference that you can see in typefaces is serif fonts versus sans serif fonts. So as you can see on the top right, serif fonts have like little indentations, whereas sans serif fonts don't. And these convey very different signals to your users. So it's very important to keep in mind while you're choosing a font for your branding. And then white space, so the amount of space between characters, lines, and paragraphs. On alignment, which is the setting of text flow relative to a page or column. And ultimately, typeface and fonts play a huge role in building brand recognition. So as you can see here, for example, Guitar Hero is very distinct, has very specific typeface. And so okay, this is an example of a design system. So ultimately, most brands have their own design systems that they follow throughout their web products. And then so here you can see that headings, subtitles, and body fonts and captions, they're all very they're all set. They're all very intentionally set. And this includes the typeface, the weight, the size, the case, and letter spacing. So everything is so very clearly set out. And this also allows you to maintain consistency throughout the throughout your product. And another super important thing to keep in mind for overarching visual design and hierarchy, visual design and typography, is the hierarchy of your typography. So for example, as you can see here, the display font is clearly the thing your eye initially goes to and is aware that that is the most important. And then there's the overline, the heading, the body. And then as you can see, based on their location, their weights, and their sizing, your brain intuitively has your brain intuitively interprets the importance of each of these lines and these typographies. So finally, once you've created an iteration of your visual design, a super important part of it is usability testing and design validation. So this is essentially putting your design in front of target users and ensuring that your product is being used in the correct way. And when I say correct way, I mean ultimately like the way that you interpreted or the way that you intended as the product designer. So there's a lot of different products that you can use to do this, including Maze Design, user testing, or even just using Zoom and having your users walk through their process. As you can see though, here you can also use heat maps to track eye movement and see where users are focusing their attention on, and if that follows your intended hierarchy. And then, so this can also be done through profile interviews, value surveys, usability testing, and feedback follow-ups. And okay, sorry, I think I talked really, really fast, so I'm sorry, that was a little bit short, but thank you guys for coming. Make sure to join our ACM Design Facebook, and additional resources include Coursera, Career Foundry, and Design Lab, and free tools that you can use for design in general, but also for like high fidelity prototyping and visual design are Figma and Adobe XD. Thank you.